Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, and I asked him what first attracted him to the flute.
It was essentially a shiny object that caught my attention on the wall of a music store in Lytham St Anne's, and I was deciding to trade in my trusty Fender Stratocaster guitar, having come to the conclusion I was never going to be as good as Eric Clapton, and hanging on the wall was a shiny thing. So like a magpie with a piece of jewellery, I had to snatch it down and make it my own, but for no good reason other than the fact it looked interesting and ergonomically interesting with all these little keys and almost like a Swiss watch in terms of mechanical design. I had not the faintest idea how to play it or what to do with it, even if I was able to play it, which wasn't for some months later. So it was a fortuitous buy, aged 20.
And what were the first things you played on it?
The first things were really guitar lines, because being a guitar player, albeit not a good one, I thought I'll try and translate the kind of things I would play on guitar, be they riffs or solos, and try and pick those out on the flute. So essentially starting in a given key, like E or D, the notes of the blues scale were relatively easy to find. Didn't involve too many difficult sharps and flats. It was quite an easy instrument to get going on, coming from the standpoint of being a guitar player. But it wasn't until really quite a few years later that I really tried to get to grips with the full compass of the instrument and learn to play it a bit more properly. When actually I'd probably been playing it for the best part of 15 years at the time I realised I was being self-taught, never having had a lesson, that I was actually playing a lot of the notes using incorrect fingering. So I had to relearn it again about 91, I think it was.
This was after the heady days of Jethro Tull.
Yeah. Yes, I was a huge success as a flute player, playing it entirely wrongly for all those years until somebody sent me a flute fingering chart, because I discovered when my daughter was learning to play flute at school that she was using different fingering for some of the notes. And I said, this is wrong, it should be like this. And she said, no, it's not. Look, it says so in the book. So I had to come to the unnerving conclusion that she was right, the books were right, and I was most embarrassingly wrong. So
how did it change your playing? Have you now taken on a whole wider compass, as you said earlier on?
Exactly that. It taught me to take it a bit more seriously, and in relearning to play everything, my own repertoire as well as future things that I would write. It was a good lesson in midlife, not quite a crisis, but damn close to it.
So when you do play the old stuff, is it very different?
Yes, it is. Some of the things are quite different, but it's now so ingrained in my head, it's almost as if I never played it the wrong way in the first place. It didn't apply to all the notes. It's probably about 1/3 of the notes of the 3-octave range of the flute I was playing completely wrongly. I'm in good shape now. I don't let my mind drift back to those heady days when I managed to coax things out of it that it wasn't really designed to do.
Now, it's thinking of youngsters who are, they're looking to take up a musical instrument. Now, you came to it about the age of 20, as you said, and it was just really sort of accidental. But would you encourage any youngster to have a go at the flute?
Well, I would, but that's the kind of obvious thing. For kids from 8 years onwards, playing the flute is an easy introduction to a comparatively easy music instrument compared to the cello or the violin or the brass. So the flute is relatively easy. After all, if it wasn't, I wouldn't be playing it. So it's a relatively easy start, but I think it's kind of more important in a way to almost try to encourage the old folk, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s to take up a musical instrument when they think all is lost. It isn't. You're never too late to learn. And one of the best flute players in the world, Andrea Griminelli, a friend of mine who's an Italian specialist in Mozart concertos, he didn't pick up a flute until he was 20 years old either. And then, of course, he was given tuition by James Galway, so he did get off to a good start.
Now, that's a pretty good teacher to have, really, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So you're currently touring Germany at the moment with Jethro Tull, yes?
Well, it's a Jethro Tull show of Thick as a Brick 1 and 2, so it's 2.5 hours of sheer torture for someone who doesn't like prog rock and all of the excesses, but it's a pretty serious and quite theatrical show, a lot of bits and bobs of video and stuff to keep people attentive in what is a long and quite a difficult show, but it comes to the Albert Hall at the end of June.
Excellent, and a couple of Christmas shows, I believe, over here too.
Yeah, I usually do a couple of cathedrals each year. I enjoy doing the churches and cathedrals primarily because it is an opportunity to play different repertoire. which is sometimes a bit more flute-oriented. It suits the acoustics of those buildings.
So we're going to play Living in the Past now, just so we can listen to the old Ian Anderson and his previous fingering technique.
That's right.
Listen, we won't ask you to do a new version for us just yet. But Ian, thank you so much for your insight into the flute and for joining us today. Thanks a lot.
It's a great pleasure. Good to talk to you.
Jethro Tull, Living in the Past, flute.